We're going positive today on live Wednesday Locked On Cardinals.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Cardinals. Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day, free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Tomorrow, I'll be doing my crossover Thursday with Mike Debate from Locked On Patriots. We've got an extra podcast today because the Cardinals play Monday night. So I'm taking today and kind of removing the mar and the muck of the 2022 season as a whole for the Cardinals and shedding some positivity. There are three positive storylines that are not just going to end at the end of the 2022 season, but will continue to be part of the texture of the Arizona Cardinals organization, hopefully for many, many years to come. And each one of these entities / players deserves a segment of their own. And I feel like it's important to have some sort of perspective with some good things that are happening when there's a lot of not so great news, content, etc., surrounding what's been a completely disappointing season for the Cardinals. And I feel like it's just necessary at this point, especially coming off the bye. There's some malaise after their loss to the Chargers on the 2-point conversion at the end of the game. It's like, man, the Cardinals should be at least 6-6 right now. You know, there was the Philly game that they probably should have won, even though it was a one-score game when Matt Amendola missed the field goal to tie. And there was the Minnesota game that the Cardinals probably should have won. So there are three entities / players that I need that, deserve some credit, and it'll add some positive validity for what we've seen so far this year and hopefully into the future for the Cardinals. The first one, and I've talked about this a lot, and I'll continue to talk about this until hopefully both of these players have inked a new contract with the Cardinals. Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins are both really good at football. And spoiler alert, I know. But them together for an extended period of time, i.e. more than the handful of games we're going to see this season with both of them on the field, is invaluable for the Cardinals' future. And both of them have different contract situations. I don't believe DeAndre Hopkins has any guaranteed money coming after this season with the contract that's currently constructed. Hollywood Brown, the option was picked up by Steve Keim. That's, wishful thinking that Hollywood Brown's going to play on the 5th year of his rookie scale contract. Spoiler alert, he ain't. He isn't. He shares an agent with A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, none of whom played out the extent of their rookie scale contract before getting contract extensions. Hollywood Brown's going to want to get paid. And Steve Keim, he's going to have to. They traded a first-round pick for him, and I think that was the plan all along. With DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to want a lot of cheese also, I would assume, to stay here. He seems like a guy who has an outside chance of taking a little bit less to stay and make it work and add the roster, build the roster out. But there is a chance that there is going to be between $40 and $50 million allocated to those two players alone, on top of Kyler Murray's contract. I know it's not ideal. I know it's not run-of-the-mill. I know it's not a traditional way to build a roster. If Steve Keim started doing things traditionally, that would be the first time. So having DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown both wearing Arizona Cardinals uniforms on game day is imperative for the next 5 years for this team, in my opinion. Oh, well, DeAndre Hopkins is 30. DeAndre Hopkins has never relied on his speed, ever. Yet he still gets to where he needs to go. That is a skill set that is not predicated solely upon speed, which could yield supreme longevity, barring any sort of injuries later on, to where he could be a true threat from the wide receiver position for the next 5 years. I have no doubt about that. So that's one positive thing that we've seen so far this year. Unfortunately, it's been marred by suspension and injury, respectively. But when you have two players like Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins on the field healthy at the same time, I'm hard-pressed to find a better tandem in the NFL. Now, you could say T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, sure. You could even say Adam Thielen, even though he's taken a couple steps back this year, and Justin Jefferson. Yeah, you could. But if you put these two, if you put D-Hop and Hollywood against any of them, they'd be 1 or 1A, in my opinion. And that is an entity that the Cardinals cannot afford to let fizzle out. It was one of my biggest fears going into this season when DeAndre Hopkins was out for the first 6 weeks due to the suspension, was the Cardinals not playing meaningful games when both of them were on the field together. And Hollywood Brown getting hurt right as DeAndre Hopkins came back, compounded that issue. And now the Cardinals sitting at 4-8 is kind of one of the biggest fears realized. However, there is no way that Steve Keim could rationally not extend Hollywood Brown and not extend DeAndre Hopkins, in my opinion. So one of the positives, even though we've only seen them on the field together at the same time very sparingly, what Hollywood Brown did in the first 6 weeks, special. What DeAndre Hopkins has done since he's come back, special. And you need as many special players on a roster as you can have at any given time, regardless of position. And if this means making consolations elsewhere to re-sign both of these players, you do it. This is the bed that Steve Keim has made. You can't say, oh, they can't afford to do that. Well, what's plan B? What's plan B? Plan A, B, and C should be giving as close to a blank check as possible, with both of them at different points in their career, and having them both stay. And I feel like this isn't to say that, they're just going to let Hollywood Brown walk. That's not the case. But he's going to want a contract extension before the 2023 season starts. If anything that we've seen from the players represented by his agent are telling, all for the future. None of them, remember, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, none of them played the extent of the rookie scale contract. They all got contract extensions before the last year. Why would this be any different? Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. That is one of the greatly positive storylines we've seen from the Arizona Cardinals so far this season. Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins are both really good, and they're both on the Arizona Cardinals. Unfortunately, they haven't played on the field as much as you would have liked to have seen through the first 12 weeks plus a bye. The next positive storyline. It's a surprise. It was a surprise. And I'm grouping these two players together, but they're kind of in the same situation, just on different parts of the spectrum of that situation. I'll talk about it next. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. It's like Airbnb for cars. It's killer. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget. Book an SUV or minivan for a family road trip, a pickup truck for some errands, or even test drive an electric vehicle. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. I am the host, Alex Clancy. You can follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. You can follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. If you want to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be awesome. If not, I'm just happy that you're here. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Thank you you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes, local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Day, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins, really good at football. Both Arizona Cardinals need to remain that for the future. Yes, money should be allocated elsewhere to build winning rosters. Steve Keim has never adhered to conventional wisdom or non-rudimentary thought processes when building out a roster. So why would you start now? Oh, no, you know what? DeAndre Hopkins, thank you so much for your time. I know we have a team. Maybe we'll trade you and get a draft. What are we doing here? Keep them both. Keep them both. And just pay them. You have to bite it, but just pay them. This second entity are two separate players who have been compared a lot to each other. One was a training camp darling. The other showed flashes his rookie year, but was injured for a large chunk of the season like he had been in his last couple of years in college. Greg Dortch and Rondale Moore are both positive storylines to come out of the 2022 season thus far. Rondale Moore had a breakout year before he got injured again. He showed the special. He showed the oh my God moments when he caught the ball in space. He showed that this dude is going to be, if the aforementioned Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins are both retained after this season, the best wide receiver 3 in the NFL. Or has that potential to be, at least, if he remains healthy. And they, let him run beyond the line of scrimmage. That wrinkle into this wide receiver room was one that was discussed, but we hadn't seen it for more than a couple games. So it was like, well, if Rondale Moore stays healthy, if they figure out how to use him, if Cliff Kingsbury can put together a game plan for him where he can run routes, again, that doesn't show that beyond the line of scrimmage is lava, we could see what Rondale Moore could potentially be. A lot of conditionals because they used him completely incorrectly last year. They used him like they used Andy Isabella. And the big plays that Rondale Moore had last year were on broken plays where Kyler Murray was running behind the line of scrimmage like a whirling dervish for a minute and a half and found Rondale Moore wide open. The flashbulb one was against Minnesota, broken coverage. He was wide open, and he took it to the house. Rondale Moore was utilized correctly. It took a couple games. He was utilized correctly this year, and you saw what the potential was. That is a massively huge storyline for this team. Now, Alex, well, if Rondale Moore is emerging, why did DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown both need to be retained? You could use that money elsewhere, like for an edge rusher or an offensive lineman or a corner that Steve Keim should have addressed in the draft last year but didn't. Good question. Well, if Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury are both going to be in their respective posts in 2023, why not just say, you know what? We're seesawing all the way to the offense. Who gives a rip at this point? Who gives a rip? Rondale Moore, Hollywood Brown, and DeAndre Hopkins would be the best wide receiver trio in the NFL. They would. How they're utilized, that's on the coach. So if you have reservations about that, that's fine. I'll leave that here. That's not for today. This is a positive podcast. Rondale Moore has been a shining light when he's been on the field and utilized properly. He has. And then Greg Dortch. Greg Dortch was the darling to come out of camp, him and Antonio Hamilton. Greg Dortch, when Rondale Moore was out, showed flashes that he deserves a roster spot to be a wide receiver 3/4 and deserves plenty of runs to be route week in and week out. And he's shown in the stead or in the, when the hole is there with Rondale Moore out due to injury, or DeAndre Hopkins or Hollywood Brown with their suspension and injuries respectively, that he's an NFL receiver and he should 100% be a part of this organization. And that's been, it's been a fascinating storyline to watch because the dude can play. He's fast, runs good routes. He's what you hoped Andy Isabella would be, I guess. But he was getting to run routes that they wouldn't let Rondale Moore run. Rondale Moore is a better version of Greg Dortch, and I stand by that. Rondale Moore is an absolute vision to watch when he's healthy. So regardless, Greg Dortch and Rondale Moore, two other receivers that have shown flashes of what could potentially be for the young crew inside this wide receiver room that could make it the most talented and deepest in the league, which would do nothing else but help Kyler Murray really take that next step into elite quarterback level. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. The defense will not be forgotten in this positive podcast here on a Wednesday. Tomorrow, Mike Debate and I will be doing our crossover Thursday. Host of Locked On Patriots and myself will be previewing the Monday Night Football matchup where Bill Belichick comes into town, see if the Cardinals can get a dub at home, something they've struggled to do over the last 14 months or so. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. I'll be doing my projections on Friday and then kind of, icing on the cake on Monday's podcast ahead of Monday Night Football. There's one more really positive storyline that I touched on a little bit yesterday, but I'm going to go more in depth now. Locked On Cardinals. We're in positivity on a Wednesday, baby. I don't care if the Cardinals are 4-8. I don't care. It's Positivity Wednesday. BetOnline.net. Locked On Cardinals. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline is your number one source for sports wagering, info, stats, news, analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. 3 positive storylines for the Arizona Cardinals in 2022. You've heard that right. Cardinals are 4-8. It's been a tough season. There's been some peaks. There's been some massively deep valleys. And there's been a lot of in between. Uncertainty, finger pointing, blame pie percentaging, and a fan base that there's like an aisle in the middle where it's like, it's this person's fault. It's this person's fault. And it's crazy. And it's something like this season has been confirmation bias for whatever you've believed in before the season started. You don't believe in Steve Keim, it's Steve Keim's fault. You don't believe in Cliff, it's Cliff's fault. You don't believe in Kyler, it's Kyler's fault. Just confirmation bias. Confirming what you already believed with flashbulb memories, and you forget everything else that's going on because the confirmation of what you already thought was happening. Every time I get my car washed, it rains. The only time you remember getting your car washed when it rains is when it rains. You don't remember all the other times that stick out. Confirmation bias. The third positive storyline in 2022 for the Arizona Cardinals, grouped up with DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown and Greg Dortch and Rondale Moore, is the young players who've really emerged on the defensive side of the ball. Not out of necessity, but emerged and playing a lot of football on Sundays don't equate as the same thing. Zaven Collins has really substantiated himself as a foundational piece of this defense. What that means, we don't know yet. He's got the green dot on Sundays. He's playing 100% of the snaps, which is a far cry from not being able to get on the field last year. Okay? That's good. We'll see what happens from year 2 to year 3. If year 1 to year 2 leap happens again, he's going to be a Pro Bowler next year, a fringe Pro Bowler. Okay? That is kind of a lesser positive storyline, but it's just nice to see a first-round pick of Steve Keim's playing meaningful snaps. That's the barometer here. The big ones for me, and honorable mention, Cam Thomas and Myjai Sanders have really come on as of late. Cam Thomas had a couple sacks early on in the season. Myjai Sanders has gotten more playing time, and he's been playing better. If they're going to emerge that way and they're going to have more guys on the outside, it'll benefit the Cardinals in the long run. But they're honorable mention. They're not a positive storyline. They're kind of an ancillary piece. The other two who are 1 and 1A, and you can flex either or the other, are Zach Allen and Byron Murphy. Byron Murphy's missed the last couple games. Zach Allen has been healthy. He's been vibrant. He's a guy that deserves a second contract just like Byron Murphy does. The problem that's going to be happening is you can't pay everybody. And the problem with trading for players is you have less of a, leeway with inexpensive contracts. So Steve Keim and Michael Biddle are going to have their hands full this offseason because the last 4 people I talked about who are eligible for contract extensions, DeAndre Hopkins, even though he has a contract still, there's a team out after this season, and they're going to need to restructure in some capacity. Hollywood Brown, Byron Murphy, and Zach Allen. I guess you can franchise tag one of them, maybe franchise tag Byron Murphy or DeAndre Hopkins, but what are they going to do with the other 3? Both Byron Murphy and Zach Allen have been shining lights on this defense this season. Byron Murphy has solidified himself as a CB1. And to think that was a foregone conclusion when he got drafted, not true. He was statistically one of the worst corners in the NFL his rookie season. Thank you, Patrick Peterson, for cheating and, leaving the rookies out high and dry. Real team player. And I know you have a lot of animosity towards the Arizona Cardinals, but you request a trade twice and you cheat, you don't really have a whole lot of ground to stand on when your contract is up. That's still baffles me. But Byron Murphy has really emerged well. Is he going to play inside? Is he an outside corner? Is he actually capable of doing that? We saw during the first half of last season that the pass rush fell off, and then he kind of fell off with it. This year, with no real pass rush, he was a bona fide CB1 when he was healthy. And he's going to need to get paid. Zach Allen has become a force on the inside. J.J. Watt is really, I don't know if it's through osmosis or if there's been a mentor-mentee situation there. J.J. Watt has rubbed off on Zach Allen, and Zach Allen is playing the best football of his life, and he's going to deserve a contract, and Steve Keim better figure out how to give him one. 3 positive storylines this year so far for the Cardinals, even though they're 4-8. 1, DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown are both Arizona Cardinals. That's a positive storyline in and of itself. Hollywood Brown played wide receiver 1 football before DeAndre Hopkins came back. They pretty much tagged each other out and in. DeAndre Hopkins is DeAndre Hopkins. He just is. And they both need to be wearing Arizona Cardinals uniforms for the next 4 or 5 years. You hope that'll be the case. Number 2, Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch. They've been grouped together because, Greg Dortch balled out when DeAndre Hopkins was out, when Rondale Moore is hurt. He's shown flashes of a guy that can really, really add depth to a wide receiver position every week. And then Rondale Moore, when he's on the field and he's in space, he's one of the most electric players in football. And he's so much fun to watch. And then number 3, the younger guys on the defensive side of the ball. Zaven Collins, wearing the green dot fits him. The game seemed to have slowed down a little bit for him, and he's playing meaningful snaps in his second year. But really, you give the honorable mentions to Cam Thomas and Myjai Sanders, the rookies. But really, Zach Allen and Byron Murphy have become what I call pillars of the defense for the future. It started with Budda Baker. When you saw Patrick Peterson and Chandler Jones getting a little bit older, it's like, who can you trust every week to ball? Budda Baker, Jalen Thompson has thrown himself in that mix. And then now every week now, Zach Allen and Byron Murphy, when he's healthy, you trust that they're going to perform. You rely on them to perform and not just hope that they will. And the more players you have on the roster like that, the better your team's going to be. How was that for Positivity Wednesday? Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Mike Debate, Locked On Patriots, and I will be doing our crossover tomorrow, and I'll roll on, start to preview Monday night's matchup on Friday between the Cardinals and the Patriots, and then put a button on top on Monday. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Crossover Thursday with Mike Debate from Locked On Patriots.